Have you ever felt like something was watching you, but when you turn around, nothing was there? Not a ghost, not a dream, something older, something darker, something that doesn't knock on your door because it's already inside. In this video, you'll hear real stories, not from books, not from films, but from people who lived through them and were never the same again. From haunted houses that breathe in silence, to whispers crawling up through floorboards, from shadow doppelgangers caught on security cameras, to voices that know your name before you ever speak it out loud. This isn't just horror. This is what happens when reality breaks and the shadows step in. You think you're alone? You're not. At the age of 7, a boy's life began to unravel after his parents divorced. He and his younger brother lived with their mother, a waitress who worked long hours with barely enough income to survive. They moved constantly, staying in cramped apartments, budget motels, and shared rooms, never calling any place home for long. When he turned 10, they finally found a house. 2 stories tall, wide windows, chipped white paint. It stood quietly at the end of a forgotten street in a neighborhood no one bragged about. The rent was low, suspiciously low, but they didn't ask questions. After years of instability, it felt like a chance to breathe. That feeling didn't last. At first, it was small things. The television in the living room would turn on by itself, always late at night. Sometimes the volume would rise until it blared static like a scream. Other times, the screen would flicker, channels jumping without a remote in sight. Then came the knocking. Soft at first, barely noticeable. But over time it grew more deliberate, more personal. It always came from the window of the boy's bedroom, on the 2nd floor. No tree, no ledge, no way anyone could be outside. Yet the sound was real. It echoed in the quiet of night, like a message. His brother heard it too. They told their mother, but she dismissed it. She had no patience for ghost stories, not after long shifts on her feet. She told them it was probably the wind. That was until one night when she screamed. She had been alone in her room, lights off, about to sleep, when the knock came. Not gentle this time. Hard, right against her window. She stood frozen, staring at the glass, until her sons ran in and found her pale and speechless. From then on, she never slept without a light. Things continued to spiral. The mother had a boyfriend named Terrence who sometimes stayed over. One Saturday, while she worked a double shift, Terrence napped on the couch while the boys played outside. The younger brother went in for a glass of water and never came back out. Minutes passed. Then came the sound of pounding fists. The older boy rushed to the door and saw his brother crying, trapped outside. The front door was bolted shut, not just locked. The wooden bar, usually untouched, had been dropped into place from the inside. No one had moved it. No one else was awake. Terrence didn't even stir. When their mother returned and removed the latch herself, she didn't say a single word. Soon after, they heard giggling under the stairs. It was the laugh of a child, faint, soft, playful. They opened the storage door and found nothing but cold air, the kind of cold that doesn't belong indoors. Sometimes they'd catch movement at the edge of the hallway, a glimpse of a girl in white, vanishing the moment they turned their heads. That was the breaking point. They packed what little they had and left. The house didn't fight them. It simply watched them go. But it wasn't over. The next tenants lasted only 2 months. Neighbors said they complained about flickering lights, sudden chills, footsteps in the attic. Details were vague. No one stayed long enough to understand the full story. But those who lived there, they never forgot the feeling. That house wasn't haunted by something that wanted to be seen. It was haunted by something that wanted to stay. At night, the kitchen would whisper. It happened in a different house. A smaller one, filled with old furniture, rusted pans, and the thick scent of camphor and dust. The house belonged to their grandmother, and many in the family had lived there at one point or another. But no one stayed long, not without stories. The boy's older brother was the first to notice. He often stayed with their grandmother during school holidays. At night, long after everyone else was asleep, he would hear the metallic clatter of pans crashing against each other in the kitchen. Not once, not randomly, but in rhythm. like something was moving through them on purpose. He said it always started the same way. A cold stillness, then a sound like shifting breath just outside his bedroom door, then the clash of metal. He stopped sleeping in silence after that. Other things followed, shadows moving along the walls without light, the sense of being watched while brushing his teeth, and a figure standing behind the curtains that vanished when anyone looked directly. Years later, the younger brother, the same boy from the first house, stayed over during a long summer weekend. His cousin was there too. The house felt heavy, but familiar. No one spoke about the past. That night, he woke up thirsty. As he stepped into the hallway, he heard a whisper. It was coming from the kitchen. At first, he thought it was a radio. Maybe someone left it on. But the closer he got, the clearer it became. It wasn't music. It was voices. Soft, layered, weaving in and out of each other like a conversation just beyond comprehension. He stood at the kitchen threshold, heart pounding. The room was dark, but the whispers grew louder. Then, without warning, they stopped. Complete silence. He flicked the light on. Nothing. Everything in place. No one there. He told himself it was stress. Or maybe the air vents. But the next night, it happened again. The same whispers. The same sudden silence. And this time, something moved. He said he saw a silhouette pass behind the dining table. Just for a second. Just enough. He turned the light on. Again, nothing. After that, he slept with the television on, volume low, the glow of the screen making shadows less confident. The next morning, when he mentioned it over breakfast, no one was surprised. His grandmother simply nodded, as if she'd heard it all before. His cousin wouldn't even look him in the eye. Later, he learned that 2 miscarriages had happened in that house, both in the back room. His grandfather had died there too, suddenly, with no final words. They said the house was still grieving. Or maybe something never left. No one knew where the whispers came from, but they all knew not to answer. He was 11 when the dreams began. Not just ordinary nightmares, but something darker. They came without warning. Always on nights when he felt most at peace. A good day at school. Laughter with his brother. An unexpected gift from his mother. That's when they crept in, like shadows waiting behind smiles. The first dream started with a low, vibrating hum, like bass from a speaker, deep enough to shake bones. Then came the images. Streets soaked in blood. Familiar faces twisted in fear. People screaming with mouths that made no sound. Everything was moving in slow motion, except for one figure standing still. It wasn't human. He could never describe its face. Every time he tried, the memory slipped away like smoke. But what he did remember, clearly, was the voice. A child's voice. High-pitched, playful, but layered with something else. A whisper under a whisper. And when it spoke, it wasn't words. It was just intent. He would wake up sweating, his jaw clenched, and the humming would still be there in his ears. At first, he kept it to himself. But the dreams returned. Again and again, always after moments of happiness, like something was punishing him for feeling safe. Then one night, the dream changed. The voice spoke clearly. It said his name. Not once, not twice. Over and over again, each time louder. The tone shifted from a child's voice into something deeper, mocking, almost robotic, but stretched and distorted like a broken tape. He woke up screaming. That night, something inside him cracked. He stopped laughing, stopped talking much at all. His mother thought it was just puberty. His brother thought he was being dramatic. But inside, he felt like he was being watched. Not by people, but by whatever lived in those dreams. He became paranoid. He unplugged electronics at night, afraid they were gateways. He refused to sleep without the lights on. Sometimes, he would stare into mirrors for hours, just to make sure his reflection was still following his movements. Then, he remembered something else. 2 years before, he and his friends had watched a horror movie late at night, while his mom was working. The kind of movie that dared kids to feel brave. It was all fun, until they heard the sound. A voice, coming from the bathroom. Low, guttural. A single phrase, spoken with slow venom. Don't open the door." The room fell silent. One of the boys laughed nervously and said it was a prank, but the bathroom was empty. No speaker, no phone, no one inside. The boy ran outside, barefoot. He didn't stop until a neighbor called the police. Nothing was found, but the voice stayed with him. It was the same tone he would hear again in his dreams, warped under a child's whisper. And now, years later, that voice still followed him. Not outside, but within. He never slept without the TV on again. By the time he was a teenager, he stopped fearing ghosts. What truly terrified him were the things that didn't come from this world. He had always been fascinated by space, science fiction, the idea of aliens. Not the green, big-headed cartoon ones, but the ones people whisper about in late-night forums. The ones that moved in silence, that watched without blinking. He never believed any of it, until he saw one. It happened just 3 months ago. He was living in England at the time, renting a small flat in the outskirts. Life was quiet, almost boring, until the night the lights began to flicker. At first, he thought it was the wiring. Old place, cheap rent. But then the Wi-Fi started to act strange, dropping signal only in his room. His phone charger sparked without warning. The hallway bulb dimmed and pulsed, even after he replaced it twice. Then came the sleep paralysis. He had never experienced it before. That moment when the mind wakes up, but the body remains frozen. It happened suddenly. 1 second he was dreaming. The next his eyes opened to a room bathed in blue streetlight. And something was standing near the door. At first, he thought it was a shadow, but then it stepped forward, slowly. Its body was long, thin, almost paper-like. The head was the shape of a slice of pizza, narrow at the chin, wide at the top. Its skin was smooth, pale gray. And its eyes, those eyes, were enormous, jet black and perfectly still. They didn't blink. They didn't move. They just stared. He couldn't scream. The hum started again. That same deep vibration from his nightmares as a kid. It filled his skull, pushed into his bones. He tried to move, to look away, but he was trapped. The figure didn't move. It didn't need to. It just watched. Then, just as suddenly, it was gone. His body jolted. Breath returned. But the silence that followed was worse than the humming. For days, he tried to rationalize it. A dream. A hallucination. But then the electrical problems returned. The light in his bathroom flickered constantly. The television turned on by itself, just to a black screen. His laptop froze every time he tried to open anything involving the word alien. And there was something else. The night after paralysis, he found tiny handprints on the inside of his bedroom window. No dirt, no dust, just prints. Smooth. 4 fingers. He scrubbed them off. They came back the next night. Smaller, closer to the glass. He took a job cleaning office buildings. 3 different sites. All at night. It paid well, mostly because no one wanted to be there after dark. Empty floors. Motion sensor lights. Long hallways filled with cubicles that never felt entirely empty. The first 2 buildings were manageable. Just long hours of silence. The occasional flicker of fluorescent lights. And the hum of machines left on standby. But the 3rd building was different. It had a security room tucked deep inside, where dozens of monitors showed live footage from every corner. The cleaning route always ended there. At first, he would just glance at the screens while wiping the dust from keyboards. Then one night he felt it. As he turned off the hallway lights one by one, something changed in the air. It wasn't just darkness. It was the kind of silence that bends the space around you, like the walls were listening. He walked through the narrow corridor past rows of empty offices. The windows reflected only black. No movement. No sound. Then he heard breathing. Not his own. A slow, raspy exhale. Right behind him. He spun around. Nothing. He walked faster. The breathing followed. When he reached the security room, he locked the door behind him and sat in the chair, heart racing. He told himself it was in his head, until he looked at the monitors. There were 2 figures on screen. One was him, standing at the stairwell. The other, just beside him, was his brother, Except his brother hadn't come with him that night, and the way they moved didn't match. On the screen, they stood side by side, but in reality, he had walked in alone. And when he rewound the footage frame by frame, he saw it. His reflection had blinked at the wrong time. His brother's figure had turned toward the camera, while in reality, no one was there. He left the building that night without finishing the job, tried to quit the next morning, but the company begged him to stay, said the building was harmless, said cameras glitch all the time, but he knew what he saw, a doppelganger, something that wore their faces but didn't follow their rules. The last time he returned, he made one rule for himself: never look into the monitors again. In a quiet seminary school nestled deep in the hills of the Philippines, a boy named Nick began to change. He had always been the loud one, the one who cracked jokes in the dining hall, who sang off-key during prayer, who made even the quietest students laugh. But something shifted when he turned 13. He stopped smiling, he stopped talking, and he started watching. It began with small things. He would flinch when walking past mirrors. He no longer joined group prayers and always asked to sleep near the door. His eyes were constantly scanning the walls, as if something might step through them at any moment. One night, his roommate woke to the sound of Nick whispering to himself. Except it wasn't his voice. It was lower, almost growling, words that didn't match his mouth. The roommate said it felt like the air had thickened. The next day, Nick had bruises on his neck. He said nothing. Then came the night when the screaming started. The boys in the dormitory were jolted awake by the sound of Nick shouting, wild, panicked, furious. When they rushed to his bed, they found him standing on the mattress, fists clenched, shouting at something invisible near the ceiling. "You don't belong here." His body lifted. Just for a second, he slammed into the wall as if thrown. Blood smeared the plaster. He collapsed, trembling, whispering that it was coming for all of them, that it had no face, just the outline of a man who watched from corners and stepped through doors that were never opened. The seminary priests acted quickly. They gathered in the chapel, surrounding Nick in candlelight. Some prayed in Latin. Others read aloud from scripture. Nick convulsed. His voice changed, deep mocking, in languages no one recognized. And then silence. Nick fell unconscious. The room filled with a thick scent of sulfur, and one of the priests claimed he saw the shadow of a figure drift up the chapel wall, stretching impossibly tall before disappearing into the ceiling. Nick recovered, but never returned to the dorms. He left the seminary a week later. Some said he was possessed. Others said he had seen something not meant for children. But those who were there that night, those who heard the voice and saw the bruises, they never doubted it. There was something in that place, and it still had no face. She was 6 months pregnant when she took the night shift at the nursing home. The place was quiet after sundown, with long, sterile hallways and rooms filled with a hum of machines and soft breathing. Most residents were asleep by 8. By 9, the halls were still, empty, peaceful, some might say, until the smell came. It drifted in slowly, thick, sour, like something rotting. But it came from room 14, a room that hadn't had a patient in weeks. She tried to ignore it, carried on with her routine. But the smell grew heavier each night, seeping into her clothes, clinging to her hair. Then came the knocking. She heard it just after midnight. 3 loud raps on the door of room 14. When she checked, no one was there. The lights flickered above her. The hallway thermostat dropped suddenly. Her breath fogged in front of her face. The next night, she saw him, a man, old and thin, standing at the far end of the hallway. His skin was pale and sagging. He had a thick mustache, gray eyes, and wore what looked like a hospital gown. He didn't move. He just stood there, smiling. She called out, asking if he needed help. He vanished. She blinked. He was simply gone. She checked every room, every hallway. Nothing. The phone rang. It was a line inside room 14. When she picked it up, the line hissed, then growled, a deep, inhuman sound that shook her ears and sent her stumbling back. The stench returned, heavier than before, as if it had been waiting behind the receiver. She dropped the phone. It kept growling. She ran. Later that week, she returned against every instinct. She needed the job, needed the hours. But something had changed in her. She stopped going near room 14. She started carrying a small pendant when her grandmother gave her, pressed her stomach every night. But one night, the laughter started. A dry, raspy chuckle that echoed through the halls like broken glass. When she followed the sound, it led her to the end of the corridor where an old phone sat on a side table. It began ringing. Slowly, steadily, she picked it up. No growl this time, just breathing. And then a whisper, so close it felt like it came from inside her own chest. He's still here. She hung up. The smell returned. She turned, and there he was again, smiling. She managed a small bed and breakfast just off the main highway. The place wasn't fancy, but it was busy. Guests came and went, usually for 1 or 2 nights. Travelers passing through, nothing more, until he arrived. A man with sunken cheeks, wild hair, and clothes that hadn't seen a washing machine in weeks. He spoke softly, barely above a whisper, and never made eye contact. But he paid in cash. No questions asked. She gave him a room upstairs. The first night, she heard footsteps on the ceiling. Not creaks, not settling wood, but deliberate steps. The room above was empty. The man's room was on the opposite end. When she checked, nothing was out of place. The hallway lights were dim, the silence deep. She convinced herself it was her imagination. The next day, he asked a strange question. "Do you keep tools in the attic?" She hesitated. The attic wasn't part of the guest area. There were no pipes, no maintenance access. Just a sealed crawl space used for storage. She told him no. He smiled. That night, she heard the footsteps again. But this time, they didn't stop. They circled, padded slowly across her ceiling, then paused directly above her bed. She didn't sleep. At dawn, she went up a flashlight. The attic door was still bolted shut. Dust covered the latch. Nothing had moved, except for one thing. A line of handprints smeared across the floorboards. Small, greasy, leading away from a hatch. She called the police. They found nothing illegal, nothing stolen. The man was still in his room. Calm, quiet. She tried to stay professional, but the unease grew. Then he knocked on her office door. He asked again about the attic, said he heard dripping sounds, that there might be a leak. She told him firmly there were no pipes, no water lines, no access, but he kept staring at the ceiling as if he already knew something she didn't. That night, she locked her bedroom door for the first time in months. Just after midnight, the fire alarm went off. She bolted out of bed, heart racing. Smoke? No, just silence. She checked the panel. No alerts, no faults. She glanced toward the hallway and saw him at the top of the stairs, holding something. Metal, long, sharp. A knife. She ran, locked herself in the laundry room, called the police. By the time they arrived, he was sitting in the hallway, calm again, knife resting on the floor beside him. He said he was looking for the leak. They arrested him. He never explained how he got into the attic. He never explained why the handprints matched his fingers perfectly. She sold the place a month later. No guests ever heard what happened. But someone still walks in that ceiling at night. It was the kind of house children dare each other to approach. Old, towering, silent. Sitting at the edge of a cul-de-sac in rural Alabama, it looked abandoned. Paint peeling, shutters hanging, porch sagging. But the grass was always trimmed, the windows clean, as if someone still cared. No one lived there, or so people thought. A boy lived just 2 houses down. He and his sister often played in the fields nearby, riding bikes and chasing fireflies long after the sun dipped behind the trees. One day, he wandered closer to the old house. Curiosity pulled him to the back door, where something gleamed in the dirt. A porcelain plate, white with gold trim, uncracked, impossibly clean. He picked it up, turned it over. No dust, no insects, like it had just been placed there. He took it home. That night, the house changed. Lights flickered in the hallway. though no one touched a switch. The air smelled like stale smoke, cigarette ash, and something older. He heard the back door creak open, then slam shut. He asked his mother if she heard it. She shook her head. He checked. The door was still locked. Later, as he brushed his teeth, he saw something behind him in the mirror. A shape, tall, thin, not moving. When he spun around, nothing was there. The next night, his sister woke up crying. She said she saw someone standing in the hallway. Not mom, not dad. A woman with hair that floated. Their parents laughed it off. But the back door opened again. And this time, the smell of smoke was stronger. It filled the kitchen, then vanished. The lights in the living room began flickering so violently they had to unscrew the bulbs. The family blamed the wiring, until the boy found ashes on the bathroom floor. Cold, gritty, perfectly centered in a circle. They called his uncle, a quiet man with deep lines on his face and a firm grip on silence. He stayed the night, shotgun resting across his lap. In the morning, he didn't say a word, just told them to return the plate. The boy walked to the old house alone. He placed the plate on the steps, waited, then turned and walked home without looking back. That night, the house was dark again, but he could still feel it watching from behind the curtains, waiting. He lived alone in a quiet suburb. No pets, no roommates, just a small yard, a mailbox, an illusion of safety. The first time he noticed something wrong, it was just a car, a black sedan parked across the street, tinted windows, no movement. It stayed for hours, then disappeared just before nightfall. The next day it returned. He watched from the kitchen window as the engine remained silent, the figure in the driver's seat never stepping out. No license plate on the front, no parking violation, just waiting. Then came the phone call, a blocked number. He answered and a voice whispered, "Nick Sullivan says hello." He didn't know any Nick Sullivan. The line went dead. He changed his locks, installed cameras, started sleeping with the lights on, but the car kept coming back. Then he saw the man. It was nearly midnight. He heard movement outside, went to the window, and there, just at the edge of the bushes, was a man wearing a mask, blank, white, emotionless. He stood perfectly still, staring directly at the house. The man raised a hand, slowly, and pointed at the front door, then turned and vanished into the night. The next morning, the code to his garage keypad had been changed. He had never told anyone that number. The police came, filed a report, told him it was likely a prank, maybe a bored teenager. He didn't believe them. He asked a friend to stay over, someone who owned a gun. They took turns keeping watch. But every night, the man in the mask returned, always just out of reach. Sometimes at the back fence, sometimes standing by the trash cans, never speaking, never running, just watching. One night, the cameras glitched, every single one. When they checked the footage later, the man never appeared, but the front door had opened by itself at 2:37 a.m. No alarm, no sound. He changed the locks again. He moved the bed against the door. Then came the final call. Same block number. This time the voice said, "I see you." He didn't sleep that night. When morning came, his friend walked outside to get coffee and stopped cold. Scratched into the hood of the car was a phrase. "Welcome home, Nick." His name wasn't Nick. He never found out who the man was, or how he knew the code, or why he kept coming back. But even now, in a new city behind a new door, sometimes he still wakes up at 2:37 a.m. and listens. It started with footsteps, light ones, just outside the fence near the edge of the woods, where no trail existed. The area was quiet, surrounded by low hills and pine trees that seemed to hum when the wind passed through. The town was small. Everyone knew everyone, and everyone knew not to go near the tree line after dark. The high school sat just a few blocks from the edge of the forest. Students often told stories about witches, rituals, missing pets. Most were laughed off as teenage fantasy, until the screams began. Not human screams. Not entirely. They sounded like a woman and a cat screaming together, distorted, broken, rising in pitch until it pierced the ears. They came from the woods. always at night, always from different directions. Then people started seeing things. Shapes in the fog. Figures crouched unnaturally low, watching from behind bushes. Eyes that glowed without light. One student claimed he saw a woman walking on all fours. Her limbs bent the wrong way. Her head tilted, twisted, and her eyes, they were too far apart. Another boy followed the sound one night. He never made it past the fence. He froze mid-step and began sobbing uncontrollably. When his friends dragged him back, he couldn't speak. For weeks, he refused to go near windows. Others heard whispers, low voices calling their names, even when they were alone, sometimes from the lockers, sometimes from inside the bathroom stalls. One teacher resigned after hearing her daughter's voice calling from inside the supply closet. Her daughter had died years earlier. Then came the sightings near the dog park. People described thin, hairless creatures that stood upright for seconds before dropping to all fours and vanishing into the trees. Locals began calling them skinwalkers, but no one said the word out loud more than once. Some tried to record the sounds. Phones froze. Audio files corrupted. Lights flickered. And always, the scream returned. Some nights it was distant. Other nights, it came from right outside someone's window. It never repeated the same pattern, but it always ended the same way. A knock. Just one. She moved into a small apartment downtown. Old building. Thin walls. But cheap and close to work. She didn't believe in ghosts. Not really. Maybe she liked scary movies, sure. Maybe she had the occasional goosebump when the lights flickered, but none of it was real until it was. The first time it happened, it was 1 a.m. She walked into the bathroom, half asleep, and caught a glimpse of something in the mirror. Not herself. Not exactly. It was a man. Tall, wearing a dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat. His face was mostly hidden, but his mouth stretched into a grin that didn't move. She spun around. The bathroom was empty. She turned back. So was the mirror. She blamed exhaustion, stress. But the next night, it happened again. Same time, same place, same man. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there in the mirror. She started leaving the bathroom light on at night. The mirror covered. But soon, things began to shift. Objects fell without being touched. Doors creaked open without wind. Her shampoo bottle launched itself across the shower. Then came the voice. A low, dragging whisper that came from inside the walls. It didn't say words. It made sounds. Breathing, clicking, growling. She tried to record it. The audio glitched, played backwards, warped, but beneath the distortion, something could be heard. A laugh. A slow, deliberate laugh. She called a friend to stay over. But the presence didn't care. In the middle of the night, they both woke to find long scratches across her back. 3 deep lines parallel like claws. She had been sleeping face down. Her friend swore nothing touched her. They blessed the apartment. They burned sage. They prayed. The air felt lighter for a while. But the next week it returned. This time, the bathroom mirror was fogged up, and someone had written in the condensation, "Still here." A man once lived in an old boarding house with 5 other tenants. The building was narrow, with creaky stairs and peeling wallpaper. But it was cheap, and that was all that mattered. His room was on the 2nd floor, tucked at the end of a crooked hallway. The only window faced a dark alley between buildings, and directly across was a brick wall. No sunlight, no view. But one night, he saw something in that window. It was a reflection of a room that wasn't his. He was brushing his teeth, leaning over the small sink under the window, when he noticed it. The faint outline of furniture behind the glass. A chair in the corner. A tall lamp. A figure standing by the doorway. He stepped back. His room was empty. He leaned forward again. The figure was gone. The lamp blinked off. There had never been a lamp. He stopped using the sink after that. But the reflection kept changing. Each night, the window showed something else. A hallway lined with mirrors. A room filled with old dolls. A hospital bed surrounded by shadows. And sometimes it showed him, Not as he was, but older, paler, sitting on the edge of his bed, head bowed, muttering words he couldn't hear. He covered the window with newspaper. It didn't help. The images began appearing in his dreams, always flickering, always distant, until one night, he woke up standing at the window, the paper torn down, his breath fogging the glass. And there it was, the man, standing in a room across the alley, wearing his clothes, smiling, and behind him, another face appeared, pressed against the glass from inside. But this face wasn't human. He moved into the basement unit of an old Victorian home that had been converted into separate apartments. It was dim, low-ceilinged, and always smelled faintly of earth and damp wood. But it was quiet, too quiet. The noise began on the third night. A tapping, soft, repetitive, always just beneath his feet. At first, he thought it was pipes, or maybe rodents. But the tapping had rhythm. It sounded intentional. He stomped on the floor. The tapping stopped. He waited. It returned. Later, as he lay in bed, the sound changed. From tapping to scratching. From scratching to whispering. Faint. Muffled. Like someone was speaking through insulation. He pressed his ear to the floorboards. A voice. Deep. Dry. As if it hadn't used words in decades. He couldn't make out the language. Just the cadence. Urgent. Hungry. He asked the landlord if someone had lived there before him. The old man paused. Said the basement had been sealed for a long time. Said the last tenant broke the lease. Left in the middle of the night. Never left a note. He checked the floor for vents, crawl spaces, anything. Found nothing. That weekend, the voice grew bolder. It called his name. It didn't whisper anymore. It spoke, clearly just beneath the floor, as if lying face up, waiting for him to respond. He poured salt across the room, placed a crucifix at each corner. The voice laughed. He stayed at a friend's place for 3 nights. When he returned, the apartment felt different. Still, he checked the floor again. There, under his bed, was a new crack in the boards. Thin, fresh, and from within that crack, he heard breathing. Slow, wet, patient. That night, he slept in his car. The next morning, he returned only to grab his things. He never looked on the bed again, but as he closed the door behind him, he heard the voice one last time, from deep below, almost. It was a town too small to appear on most maps. Surrounded by forests, lakes, and silence, it was a kind of place where people kept their heads down and didn't ask questions. But there was one place everyone talked about, the trail behind the dog park. No one walked it twice. Stories varied. Some said it was cursed. Others said it was just too quiet, like the woods are swallowed sound. But the most common tale was of the shadows. They weren't figures. They weren't creatures. They were absence. Shapes that shouldn't have existed. Moving without source or light. Bending around trees that never shook. Sliding across the dirt without leaving footprints. The high schoolers dared each other to go there at night. Flashlights died within minutes. Phones glitched. Some said they heard crying. Others heard laughter. But one girl came back different. She had gone in with a group of friends. 3 in total. Only she returned. No one knew what happened. She refused to speak. For days, she stared at the same corner of her bedroom, whispering in a language her parents didn't recognize. Her dog wouldn't enter the room. Her reflection didn't blink when she did. Then, just as suddenly, she was fine. Or so it seemed. Until her friends' names began vanishing from official records. Their school profiles were blank. Their lockers empty. Their desks reassigned. As if they'd never existed. She tried to prove they had. Brought yearbook photos. Group selfies. But their faces were gone. Blurry silhouettes where heads used to be. She begged people to remember. No one could. Then the shadows came to her room. She said they watched her sleep. Slid under the door like smoke. Spoke in the voice of her mother, calling from the hallway. Even when her mother wasn't home. She moved. But the new apartment already knew her name. Lights flickered when she entered. The stove clicked in the middle of the night. Her toothbrush was wet before she touched it. And in the mirror, just for a split second, She sometimes saw 3 figures behind her, still waiting. You've heard their voices. You've seen the shapes they couldn't explain. You've stood in the rooms where time didn't move and watched the mirrors that never told the truth. These stories didn't fade with the morning light. They stayed, etched into skin, memory, and silence. Not every door can be locked. Not every voice is imagined. Not every reflection belongs to you. And if tonight something taps at your window, don't look, not because it isn't real, but because it is.